So this kid, so I'm sitting in St. John in the office, and this kid says to me, he's like about 25. He's a very enthusiastic, very smart young journalist. And he says, why don't we put ads on? That way we can save the journalism. I said, it's not our policy. And then there was an older guy who has been around for a while, and he said, you understand that we are the only alternative to the Irvings. You understand that? I said, yes, I understand that. Putting ads on is not our policy. So we cut it, because we didn't put ads on. So what happened? Exactly what you would expect. The quality of the journalism diminished. The counterweight to the Irvings in terms of an alternative view was cut down. That's what happened. I don't know how you make these choices. Everybody would prefer to have an advertising-free radio, for sure. But then you say to yourself, really? Should we not have saved what was going on in Fredericton and in St. John? These are really terrible, terrible, terrible dilemmas. And they come about because it's the worst financed broadcaster, public broadcaster in the industrialized world.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, thank everyone for their time. I want to ask a question kind of about the future of the CBC. Like, we have a lot of people who have been fans of the CBC for a while, but if you look around the room, it's basically mostly baby boomers who grew up on radio and TV. And I like radio, TV's fine, I have to admit. A few of my friends maybe listen to the radio like I do. Most of them tend to be grad students or kind of like radio nerd people, I guess. But everyone's online. So I have a question that's mostly for Linden and Richard. And what do you think is the potential of the CBC's online initiatives? Things like cbc.ca for news and podcasts. Do you view them cynically? Do you view them hopefully? And do you think that they'll serve as a surrogate when the CBC's radio and broadcast television enterprises inevitably die?
Well, I can say this, that the CBC website is the most used news and public affairs website in the country. The level of the podcasting of all the CBC radio shows was an initiative that started a number of years ago and has been wildly successful. The CBC now mounts all of its shows, all of its television shows, so that you can see them online, on demand, whenever you want to see them. All those things are fabulous because they allow you to extend the reach of the shows. But if radio and television die, that all dies too, because that's what finances the shows that are podcast or that are made available on demand.
There is some cross-platforming that already exists. We did a show in Halifax a couple of years ago called Artzuka, and it was a children's show, and we did it as a co-venture. So we shot it in Halifax with an English host, and we had the German host come onto our show, and he did his part, and we doubled some of the hands. The strongest component was the web component, because that's where we did the marketing. That's where we showed the children how to make the kits in detail. So that was a very, very inventive piece of cross-platforming, and you will see more and more of that. But for the most part, from my point of view, people still prefer a TV set to watch TV and a computer to compute.
Not in his world.
Okay, can we have another? One more question, okay. I'm sorry, this is going to be our last question.
My concern, of course, about the cuts is that people need to resist the cuts and protest the cuts. But there's also an opportunity. The CBC's not alone in being cut. You've got organizations at universities, journalism schools. You've got the National Film Board. If you look around the country, the Canadian Campus Community Radio Association, they're either government-funded or civic in some way, not-for-profit. You've an infrastructure. Every element of that infrastructure is facing similar problems. Can you work together, practically?
I think you'd have to look hard to find an institution that has been under such sustained attack for so long. Yes, everybody has to bite the bullet now and then, but it seems interesting just statistically, after the 1995 budget cuts in which the CBC lost a third of its budget, in the years, 5 or so years following that, all the other cultural industries, excluding the CBC, their government appropriations rose by about 40%, 39%.
That's true in the last 5 years of the Harper government, too.
And during that same period of time, the CBC, which is arguably the most important public cultural institution in the country, lost another 9% of its federal allocation.
And that's
So
what
yes, everybody has a problem, but some people have a bigger problem than others.
And that is, as with the other media companies, while being asked to do more, less money, while adding the online component to the programming that they were already doing. So you are spread much more thin in different media with less money than you had before. I'm at a university and we whine a lot, but I would rather be working at a university and dealing with its budget right now than with the CBC's.
I want to say this, I mean, and this is because this is a room full of consumers of the television product, voters, politically aware people. I mean, there is a politically driven, ideologically driven campaign against public broadcasting. I will say that absolutely straight up, and if you don't like it, do something about it.
But here's the thing that's so interesting to me is that this issue about whether the CBC, and it's about news and current affairs, whether it's fair is a fundamental issue. And as you know, many people in the current government think that it was actively hostile to the Conservative Party. That is the view. And in fact, there are still people, backbenchers, who pop up and say we should just get rid of it. We did a study. One of the things I was very, very preoccupied with was, is it true? Is it true? We tried to broaden it out. We put in more business news. We got the wild Kevin O'Leary, and we did a whole bunch of stuff.
Thank you.
Oh, he's all right.
The interesting fact, though...
But what I was going to say is that, so what we did, we got the 5 smartest folks we could find internationally to design a study for us to look at whether the CBC was treating people fair and square, whether the coverage was as broad as it should be. And we looked particularly at how it was treating the political parties, whether it was giving more time to one set of parties than the other, and whether it was treating them more or less positively. Fascinating result of the study was that the CBC covered the Tories a little bit more, well, significantly more than it covered either the Liberals or the NDP, which is probably normal because they were in government. And they were slightly more positive, the news, to the Tories than to the others. In other words, there was nothing to choose, that there was no issue about political bias at the CBC. We did this study, and what we wanted to do was we wanted to put it out and then precipitate a conversation about this precise issue so we could get it on the table and have it dealt with logically and have it dealt with on the basis of facts. So we put it out, and then we released all the data. We said, here, go and do the analysis yourself. Find out whether our analysis is right or not. And you know what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was not taken up anywhere. It precipitated absolutely no debate. But I can tell you right now that the best information we have and the best research we have is that people who claim that the CBC is biased in its news are wrong.
Okay. Well, I think we can all agree that the CBC has a lot of problems to work out. I don't think we're ever going to agree on how they should be worked out. But I want to thank all 4 of you for a very provocative evening, and I want to thank the audience for turning out in such huge numbers. And just one final thing I wanted to mention is that in terms of the government's, what we've been talking about, the constant slashing of CBC funds by the government, whereas in the UK, the funding for the BBC is spectacular. But the governments in the UK have hated the BBC just as much as the governments in Canada. And yet they always continue the funding. Why? I think because there's a huge public support for it. And if there were a political price to be paid for slashing the CBC, then the CBC wouldn't be slashed this way. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much.
That was the point that had to be made. Good, that was the point that had to be made.